The fluorescent lights hummed, the kind of sound that made silence louder. 20 recruits stood stiff in a line, all in civilian clothes, waiting for judgment. At the center of the room stood General Arthur Hayes, his medals catching the light like small suns. His eyes scanned the recruits and stopped on a young woman. Plain sneakers, second-hand jacket, posture steady. Her name tag read Nadia Haleem. "So, you're here for the linguistics position?" he asked, his tone carrying the weight of disbelief. "Yes, sir," she answered evenly. The general smirked, lifted his phone, and held it just beyond her reach. "You want the job? Translate this." The screen was filled with Arabic script. Officers around him chuckled. One whispered, "This'll be good." A recruit in the back started recording. Nadia didn't reach for the phone, didn't flinch. She read the reflection in a nearby glass panel and spoke, her voice clear and calm. "Yetlab muterjim bayujer thalathat alaf dollar sharian. Looking for translators. Pay, 3,000 a month." The laughter stopped. Hayes blinked, but she wasn't finished. "Modern Standard Arabic," she continued, "but with Egyptian structure. Author likely educated in Cairo, not the Gulf." The phrasings from around 2019, salary figures, and verb forms matched that era. Silence filled the room. One officer lowered his clipboard, another looked away. Captain Elena Mora, a sharp-eyed woman near the back, stepped forward. "You noticed all that from one glance?" "Yes, ma'am," Nadia said. "You can tell a lot from how people write." General Hayes's smirk faded into something unreadable. "Fine," he muttered. "Get her tested. Properly." Minutes later, Nadia sat in a small testing room. Across from her sat Dr. Minji Park, a linguist with kind eyes. "Relax," she said. "We'll start simple." They began with Mandarin. Nadia read the simplified characters aloud and translated fluently. Then Pashto, southern dialect, Kandahar province. Russian, she pointed out a missing soft sign. Farsi and Dari, she distinguished them instantly. Swahili, Korean, even Yoruba followed. Each answered with precision and quiet certainty. Dr. Park leaned back, stunned. "Where did you learn this?" Nadia hesitated. "Group homes. Chicago." The walls were thin. "I couldn't sleep, so I listened to kids arguing, praying, singing. I learned their sounds before I learned their words." Outside the glass, Hayes watched, arms crossed. Beside him stood Colonel Briggs, unimpressed. "Gifted or rehearsed?" he asked. Hayes didn't answer. When the test ended, Dr. Park slid her business card across the table. "You're extraordinary. Whatever happens, call me." "Thank you, ma'am," Nadia said softly. Moments later, Captain Mora entered, expression unreadable. "Come with me." They walked through a sterile hallway that smelled of coffee and dust. Hayes waited at the end, eyes cool. Mora handed Nadia a clipboard. "Sign here." Nadia looked down. Specialist trainee, linguistics. A badge lay beside it, her name printed clean and bold. For a second, she didn't move. "Congratulations," Mora said, clipping it to her jacket. "It's probationary, but it's a start." As Nadia walked past the general, he gave a single nod, barely visible, but real. That night, she sat alone in her barracks, badge in hand. Her reflection in the metal desk looked like someone who'd waited her whole life to be seen. From her bag, she pulled a battered notebook filled with phonetic scribbles and fragments of languages no one had paid her for yet. Her foster mother's words came back to her. "If you want to survive anywhere, learn to speak to everyone." She smiled faintly and whispered to the empty room. "They'll remember me for what I give, not what I have." Outside, the wind rattled the windows, but inside, for the first time, everything felt still. Ending line. Part 1. When someone tries to make you small, translate the moment into a stage. The office smelled like burnt coffee and flickering ambition. Nadia sat at a metal desk between two men who had already decided who she was. Staff Sergeant Daniel Cho, sharp and efficient, barely looked up from his screen. Mandarin specialist. 8 years. His tone made it sound like a warning. Across from her, Private First Class Isaiah Cole smiled. A small, disarming kindness. "Arabic," he said. "Welcome to the noise." An hour into her first day, Captain Elena Mora appeared, her presence snapping the room to attention. Intercepted chatter. Multiple languages. "We need transcripts by tomorrow." She dropped a USB drive onto the desk. "Start with file 7. Cho let out a short laugh. "Good luck." Three of us couldn't untangle that static. Nadia met his eyes. Then it's due for a fresh year. When the room emptied, she plugged in the drive. The clock read 23:47. The hum of old computers filled the silence. File 7 began, a storm of static and overlapping voices. Two, maybe three men speaking over an engine's drone. Urdu merged with Pashto, words colliding like rocks in a river. Most people would have called it noise. Nadia closed her eyes and began listening in layers, the rhythm first, then the tone, then the silence between breaths. She looped a 3-second segment 15 times, hearing what wasn't obvious. One man had a stutter. She isolated his cadence, then peeled back the other voices around it like old wallpaper. Her pen raced over the page, phonetic notes, arrows, timestamps, question marks. Hours vanished. When dawn crawled across the blinds, her monitor displayed a full transcription and linguistic analysis. 3 speakers, dialect origins, emotional cues, and an annotated translation. At 6:30, Cho walked in with a thermos of coffee. He stopped cold. "You've finished that." Nadia rubbed her eyes. "Mostly." He scrolled through her report. She'd flagged a coded phrase, sub moves at dawn, and noted, "Not time, call sign. Target is mobile." Cho whispered, "That's impossible." Minutes later, Captain Mora rushed in, reading from her tablet. "Viper team is preparing a strike based on that file." "Haleem, you're sure about this?" Nadia nodded. "Positive. If they hit the compound, it'll be empty." The operations center came alive. General Hayes watched from the back, arms folded. Colonel Briggs stood nearby, lips pressed thin. Mora grabbed her headset. "Viper, target is mobile. Repeat, mobile. Adjust route." Everyone held their breath as the drone feed updated. 3 vehicles appeared on a mountain road. Moments later, confirmation crackled through the radio. Target secured. No casualties. The room exhaled as if it had been holding one collective breath. Hayes stepped forward, his voice quieter than usual. "Good work, specialist." He extended his hand. Nadia shook it, feeling the faintest current of respect shift in the air. Later, she was summoned to a conference room full of brass and polished shoes. Her file glowed on the projector. Nadia Haleem, specialist trainee. Colonel Briggs spoke first, his words clipped. "No degree. No certifications. We have procedures for a reason. Field operations aren't for hobbyists." Major Ji-Yun Kim interjected. "Sir, her analysis prevented a failed strike." "That's not luck." Briggs scoffed. "Luck or fluke, it undermines protocol." General Hayes, silent until then, cut in. "Colonel, we both know credentials don't save lives. Competence does." His gaze shifted to Nadia. "You've got something rare. Keep proving it." When the meeting ended, Mora met her in the hall and handed over a laminated badge with a silver stripe. "Linguistic specialist, probationary." "You made enemies today," she said, not unkindly. "I've had worse," Nadia replied. That night, Nadia sat at her desk, the new badge beside her worn notebook. For the first time, she didn't wonder if she belonged. She just did. She whispered to herself, "They'll remember what I can do, not what I lack." 6 weeks later, the whir of helicopter blades carved through the dawn. Nadia sat strapped in beside Captain Mora, clutching her notebook as wind battered the cabin. "You'll do fine," Mora shouted over the noise. Nadia wasn't sure she believed her. She had been told at 5 a.m. that she was being deployed to an international summit. The State Department's lead interpreter had fallen sick, backups delayed. "You're it," Mora had said. Just like that. No rehearsal. No time to doubt. They landed on the rooftop of a luxury hotel turned fortress. Secret Service agents ushered them through bright halls that smelled like expensive cologne and nerves. Inside the main chamber, the flags of 7 nations lined the walls. Cameras waited like predators. General Hayes and Colonel Briggs stood near the back, watching. The moderator's voice echoed, "We'll begin with the Afghan delegation." An elderly envoy rose, hands trembling slightly as he spoke in Pashto. His voice was raw with grief. He spoke of burned villages, children lost, the hunger for peace. When he finished, the room turned to Nadia. She took a breath and began to translate. Her tone matched his sorrow. Her pauses mirrored his. She carried not just words, but weight. When she finished, the old man looked at her, eyes glassy, and nodded once. "Thank you," without saying it. Next, the Russian delegate stood, sharp and impatient. He spoke fast, cutting into the air with his hands. Nadia matched his rhythm, tempered his aggression with respect. Interpretation wasn't just about words, it was diplomacy disguised as speech. The South Korean representative followed, dense with economic data. Nadia caught a number he misstated, 15 million instead of 50, and leaned in quietly, whispering in perfect Korean. He blinked, corrected himself, and gave her a grateful nod. But then, the tension arrived. The Pakistani delegate switched mid-sentence from Urdu to Punjabi. The room stirred. Reporters looked confused. The other interpreters froze. Nadia didn't miss a beat. Her voice shifted seamlessly, two languages braided into one steady translation. Colonel Briggs watched her, arms crossed, expression unreadable. But General Hayes leaned slightly forward. Even he could feel it. This woman wasn't translating words. She was translating humanity. Then the inevitable clash. The Afghan and Russian delegates began shouting over each other, their voices sharp with history. The moderator tried to intervene, but chaos drowned him out. Nadia stood, calm amid the storm. She spoke first in Pashto, then Russian, each line steady, respectful, commanding. "Gentlemen," she said, "you both want peace. You are saying the same thing in different tongues. Let me show you." She summarized both sides, kept their dignity, softened their anger, found their overlap. She switched back to English, her voice cutting clean through the noise. "You agree on more than you realize." Silence fell. The delegates stared at each other, then nodded slowly. The moderator exhaled. For the first time all morning, the room felt human again. When the session adjourned, the Afghan envoy approached her. "You honored my words," he said softly. "You made them heard, not changed." The Russian delegate, always formal, shook her hand. "Formidable," he said. From him, that meant everything. Outside, Captain Mora grinned. "You just held 7 nations together for 2 hours." Colonel Briggs stopped on his way out. "Exemplary work, specialist." The words were stiff, but they were his. Nadia nodded. "Thank you, sir." On the rooftop, as the helicopter waited, General Hayes stepped beside her. The city glowed below like circuitry. His voice was quiet. 30 years ago, I almost ignored a sergeant who saved my life because I thought rank meant smarter. I was wrong then. I was wrong about you, too." He reached into his pocket and handed her a challenge coin, engraved with the date of the operation she'd saved. "For the day you reminded me what real leadership looks like," he said. As they lifted off, wind howled through the open door. Nadia held the coin tight, feeling its weight. Proof that she didn't just belong here. She was needed here. The general turned to her before the noise swallowed his voice. "Good work, Specialist Haleem," he said. "And remember, when you speak, people listen." That night, back at base, Nadia wrote in her notebook, "Language can stop a war before a bullet ever leaves the gun." The auditorium buzzed with energy, the kind that hums before history happens. Rows of uniforms shimmered under bright lights, the air thick with anticipation and unspoken pride. Backstage, Nadia Haleem stood still, hands clasped, her dress blues freshly pressed and alien on her shoulders. Every medal, every ribbon she saw on others felt like a language she hadn't yet learned. Captain Mora adjusted her collar, smiling gently. "You nervous?" "Terrified," Nadia admitted. "Good," Mora said. "It means you care." Terrified people do their best work. The lights dimmed. The national anthem rolled through the hall like thunder wearing velvet. Then a voice echoed over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Specialist Nadia Haleem." She walked into the light. The applause started polite, then built as people realized who she was. The woman who'd turned a chaotic intercept into a victory. The same recruit who once got mocked for her sneakers. She spotted General Hayes at the podium, standing tall, his expression carved from pride and redemption. He began, voice steady but warm. 6 months ago, Specialist Haleem walked into our ranks with no degree, no test scores, no traditional credentials. What she did have was something rarer, extraordinary skill, composure under pressure, and a mind tuned to hear what others miss. Behind him, the screen flashed maps, mission reports, and a list of successful operations. 17 missions aided, 53 lives saved. And last month, she represented this country at an international summit, interpreting 7 delegations in 4 languages, and preventing a diplomatic collapse. A wave of murmurs swept through the hall. Hayes let them fade before continuing. For her service, her excellence, and her courage, Specialist Haleem is awarded the Defense Meritorious Service Medal. He opened the blue velvet box, the bronze gleam catching the stage lights. As he pinned it to her uniform, his voice softened, meant only for her. You earned this, not in spite of who you are, but because of it. For a moment, time froze. Nadia could hear every heartbeat in the room, every breath that held back tears. The applause began again, swelling into a roar. She blinked hard, refusing to cry, not because she wasn't moved, but because this wasn't the end. It was proof of survival. Specialist Haleem has prepared a few words, the announcer said. Nadia stepped to the podium. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. I wasn't supposed to be here, she began. I don't have an inspiring story about always knowing my path. I just knew how to listen, sometimes through walls, sometimes through doubt, sometimes through people who thought my silence meant I had nothing to say. She held up her battered notebook. This is everything I own that mattered before this medal. Words, sounds, lessons learned the hard way. I didn't have credentials, but I had persistence. I didn't have references, but I had proof. The room was silent. I was told once that I didn't look like a medal, she said. And that's true. I look like work. Work that's been overlooked, underestimated, and finally recognized. The audience stood, first a few, then all of them. Applause rolled like a wave. Off stage, Dr. Minji Park waited, eyes shining. As Nadia stepped down, Park pulled her into a hug. You didn't call me, she said softly. I didn't need to, Nadia replied. Park smiled. You've become exactly who I knew you were. Outside in the corridor, Isaiah and Cho waited with matching grins. Open it, Isaiah said, handing her a small wrapped package. Inside was a leather-bound notebook embossed with her initials, NH. On the first page, a photo of the three of them laughing in the mess hall. Beneath it, Cho's neat handwriting read, Silent storms build bridges. Nadia ran her hand across the cover, tears finally slipping free. It's perfect, she whispered. It's yours, Isaiah said. For the next chapter. A reporter approached, recorder in hand. Specialist Haleem, would you share your story? People want to know what it means to overcome the odds. Nadia smiled. Only if it helps someone else believe they can do the same. That night, back in her quarters, she placed the medal beside her challenge coin. 2 small pieces of metal, but they carried the weight of every no she'd turned into a yes. She opened the new notebook, wrote 3 words across the first page. Day 1 again. Because success wasn't a finish line, it was an invitation to start helping others climb. 6 months later, the same walls that once tested Nadia now echoed with her voice as she stood before 20 fresh recruits. Their notebooks were open, pens poised, eyes flicking between her and the whiteboard that read, Introduction to Field Linguistics. Forget perfection, she told them. Out there, you won't have it. You'll have noise, pressure, and seconds to decide what a word means. Accuracy isn't about being right. It's about refusing to give up until you are. A young woman raised her hand. What if we miss something important? Nadia smiled gently. Then you rewind. You listen again. You don't stop because it's hard. You stop when you're sure. The recruits scribbled her words like commandments. Nadia watched them, remembering the first day she stood in that same building. Nervous, invisible, determined to prove she belonged. Later, in the quiet of her office, she checked her phone. A new headline made her blink twice. Department of Defense expands linguistic recruitment policy. Non-traditional candidates now eligible. She scrolled, breath catching as she saw her own name in the article. Specialist Nadia Haleem's exceptional service demonstrates that skill is not defined by degrees, but by results. The statement quoted General Hayes. Her throat tightened. It wasn't vanity, it was relief. For every overlooked voice, every rejected application that never got a chance, something had shifted. The system had learned a new language, fairness. Still processing, she walked to the recruitment office, the same room where her story had begun under fluorescent lights and quiet humiliation. Inside, the chairs were filled again with hopeful faces. One woman sat alone near the corner, early 20s, fidgeting with a worn bag strap. Nadia sat beside her. First time, the woman looked up, startled. Yes, ma'am. I'm Kesha. Nadia, she said. You look nervous. Kesha gave a shaky laugh. A little. I never finished college. I've been studying on my own, Spanish, Haitian Creole, some Arabic, even Mandarin. But people keep telling me it doesn't count. Nadia smiled knowingly and reached into her jacket. She pulled out a card and handed it over. It counts. And if anyone tells you otherwise, have them call me. Kesha blinked. Wait, you're the specialist Haleem? From the article. Just Nadia, she said softly. You're already further along than you think. You just need someone to see it. A voice called from the doorway. Kesha Thompson. Kesha stood, gripping the card like a lifeline. Thank you, she whispered. Go show them what you've got, Nadia said. As Kesha disappeared into the next room, Nadia stayed seated, watching her go. A year ago, she'd been that girl, and proven, underestimated, one question away from being dismissed. Now, she was the proof that the story could end differently. In the hallway, a familiar voice stopped her. Haleem. Colonel Briggs stood there, older in posture but lighter in tone. I was wrong about you, he said simply. I believed rules protected excellence. I forgot they can also prevent it. Nadia met his gaze. We all learn languages we never meant to, she replied. Briggs chuckled softly. Spoken like a teacher. That evening, the mess hall buzzed with laughter. Nadia sat across from Isaiah and Cho, now both instructors too. Isaiah grinned. Tell the rookies what you told those ambassadors, he teased. Cho smirked. No, tell them how you bullied me into humility. Nadia laughed. That's classified, she said, closing her leather notebook. But here's the secret. Excellence isn't talent. It's patience disguised as persistence. After dinner, she walked across the base. The flag overhead stirred in the evening wind. She paused outside her quarters, looking back at the lights of the training building. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was chasing belonging. She was building it. Inside her room, the medal and coin still sat side by side on her desk. She opened her notebook and wrote a new entry. Power never likes fairness the first time it hears it. But if you keep speaking, it will learn the translation. She smiled to herself, set down her pen, and whispered the words that had carried her this far. Respect isn't granted by rank. It's earned by how you listen. Words spread through the base faster than official memos ever could. A visiting dignitary was coming. Cameras, speeches, press coverage. A chance for someone powerful to celebrate diversity in military recruitment. Nadia had seen this before, well-meaning politics wearing self-congratulation like a badge. Still, she agreed to attend. Sometimes you had to stand in the room to make sure the story stayed honest. The processing center had been scrubbed spotless. The same fluorescent lights glared down from the ceiling, but to Nadia, they no longer hummed with mockery. They hummed with memory. General Hayes and Captain Mora stood near the front. Colonel Briggs was there too, calmer now, almost proud. Then the VIP entered, an undersecretary in a crisp suit, surrounded by aides and cameras. His voice was syrupy, his smile practiced. Wonderful to see how far we've come, he declared, shaking hands like signatures. But then his tone shifted, half playful, half poisonous. He picked up a random document from a nearby desk and turned toward a nervous young recruit. You're the new translator, aren't you? The recruit froze mid-salute. Why, yes, sir. Excellent, the official said, raising the page high. Let's make this fun. Read this out loud, translate it. Show the press what kind of talent we have here. The cameras whirred. The recruit's hands trembled. Nadia recognized that expression instantly, the panic of being made into a test, not a person. Before the silence could turn cruel, she stepped forward. Sir, she said smoothly, that document's not for demonstration. These are classified training materials. We don't conduct impromptu tests. The official chuckled, the kind of laugh that thinks it's harmless. Surely our star linguist can handle a single sentence. His tone dripped with challenge. The room's air tightened. The cameras zoomed in. Nadia took the paper gently from his hand, glanced at it once, and returned it. Actually, it's not a sentence, she said calmly. It's an invoice, in Dari, not Farsi. The difference matters. If you misread it, you'd underpay the listed worker by 1 day's wage. She paused, her tone surgical but kind. I'm sure we don't want to make a mistake like that in public. The room froze. Even the cameras seemed unsure whether to keep filming. The dignitary's grin flickered, just for a second. Ah, well, good catch, he managed, trying to pivot. But the damage was done. The room knew exactly what had happened. General Hayes stepped forward, voice steady. Here, we respect our recruits, sir. We don't test them for entertainment. We test them for excellence. His words were quiet, but they landed harder than any reprimand. The official nodded stiffly, muttered something about moving on, and steered his entourage toward the exit. Instant karma had spoken, and it spoke fluently. After the crowd dispersed, Nadia found the young recruit sitting on the steps outside, notebook open, head low. "Rough day?" she asked gently. He looked up, embarrassed. I froze. Everyone was watching. I thought. I ruined it. She sat beside him. "You didn't ruin anything. You reminded us why respect matters. Fear doesn't make mistakes. Humiliation does. You'll do fine." He gave a shaky smile. "You really think so?" "I know so," she said. "You've got ears that listen. That's the hardest skill to teach." Later that evening, she stood in front of her class again. "You all saw what happened today," she began. "Let me tell you something important. Your worth isn't proven by someone else's test. Don't let anyone turn your skill into a show. When they underestimate you, that's their mistake to study." The recruits nodded, silent but glowing with pride. That night, alone in her quarters, Nadia placed the medal and the coin side by side on her desk, polished by time and work. They didn't glitter anymore. They glowed. She opened her leather notebook, now half filled with notes and lessons, and wrote her final entry of the night. "Respect everyone. Listen before you speak. Because the voice you ignore today might be the one that saves you tomorrow." She closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and sat in the quiet. The same quiet she'd once feared, back when silence meant being unseen. Now it was peace. Outside, the flag rippled under the moonlight. Inside, Nadia smiled. Justice, she realized, wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It simply spoke, and everyone listened.